Good morning. Amen, huh? What a wonderful song. Good to see you here this morning. And well, it has been a great weekend with our retreat and everything. And all I can say is I am blessed. You know, so many things we've had to go through in life. Sometimes you think, well, you wonder if you ever be blessed. But I am blessed, and I am thankful and to be part of this congregation and to share God's Word with you this morning. And it is a special day, isn't it? When it's the Lord's Day, but it's also a day that we honor mothers. And, you know, I'm thankful for my mom. And, of course, the Mother's Day is bittersweet in a lot of ways because, you know, some people have fond memories of their mothers. Maybe some don't. And some have lost their mothers. Their mothers have gone on. If you haven't lost your mom, you need to honor her and encourage her every way that you can because it is a special day. And pray your relationship with your mom's what it ought to be. Most importantly, your relationship's right with God. And that would please your moms, I'm sure, more than anything. But, you know, for some, motherhood's an accident. You know, it didn't really plan it, didn't have it worked out, and maybe not always welcome. And for some mothers, people can't biologically have children, but that doesn't mean that they can't be a mother and raise kids. And for some, mothers weren't nice at all. You know, they were kind of mean. A guy by the name of Bush said to become a mother is not so difficult. On the other hand, being a mother is very much so. You know, there's different. You can be a mother, but to actually to be the kind of mother you need to be is a challenge. And of course, real mothers are special people. I read this and I thought it was really good. You know, real mothers would like to be able to eat the whole candy bar all by themselves and drink a Coke without any floaters in it. Y'all, moms, can you relate to that? Real mothers know that their kitchen utensils will probably end up in the sandbox. Real mothers often have sticky floors, filthy ovens, but they have happy kids. And so real mothers are very special. And real mothers know that dried Play-Doh won't come out of shag carpet. And, you know, sometimes mother asks, why me? And then they get the answer from those little voices that says, because I love you the best. And, you know, it makes it all special and all worthwhile. And, you know, great men have said a lot of things. George Washington said this of his mother. He said, all I am and I owe to my mother. And, you know, that's pretty awesome when you think about it. And, but, you know, when you start thinking about it, great people in history have had great women behind them and great mothers to support them. And basically that's true of the man we're going to talk about this morning. I'm going to talk to you about a man who had two mothers. And, you know, it's not uncommon. You know, today we see it all the time with stepmothers and, you know, how different things happen. And then somebody else ends up raising somebody's child, or a grandparent begins to raise someone else's child. But, you know, here, you know, George Washington's a good example of that. But I was thinking about in the Old Testament, the man named Moses. You know, Moses, you know, he really had two mothers when you get to looking at it. And it's kind of interesting, you know, both mothers who fulfilled a maternal role. And of course, Moses, you know, they had to make some choices about Moses. And, you know, it's true. You know, we see the impact that these two women had on him. You know, here he led 2 or 3 million people out into the wilderness and into the promised land. And you know, God put a foundation under him that allowed him to be that kind of leader, and the impact that these women had on them. But both women fulfilled their maternal role to Moses and made certain choices about him. And, you know, you look at that, they chose to give Moses life. You know, you think, well, that's not a very big thing. You know, here, you know, we see that Moses, you know, it was a time when the children of Israel had grown, and the Pharaoh rose up that that didn't know Joseph. And, you know, basically, he didn't care about the children of Israel anymore. He didn't care about the Israelites. And, you know, and basically, you know, as they began to grow and multiply, and he saw that, and he started trying to figure out ways to stop it. And one of the last things that he did, he had all children, male children under 2 killed. And that was the decree that went out. And of course, you start thinking about that. This decree goes out, and here, Jochebed, you know, Moses' mother, you know, here she had a choice to make. She had to consider some things, you know, because here she had this child in her, and basically, you know, she had felt him for 9 months, and you know, she was pregnant, and people knew she was pregnant. They had to see her, and all of a sudden she's not pregnant anymore. And but you know, they didn't know what they were going to have. You know, it wasn't like today. You can go down and have a sonogram and figure out what the baby's sex is and everything. They didn't know. So you know, a boy or a girl, and all boys were under 2 were to be killed. And so, you know, she has a choice whether to get rid of Moses or to keep Moses. But, she hides Moses for about 3 months and, and does everything she can to protect him. And finally, she can't do that anymore. And so what does she do? She makes a little basket. And she puts asphalt around it. She puts him in the reeds in the Nile River. Here, basically, the princess, Pharaoh's daughter, she goes down. Jochebed had a choice. She could have followed the king's edict, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. But what does she do? She basically takes the child, and you see what she does. She protects him. And, as a baby, I know I've been around babies, had several in my home, and, when a baby, at night, it starts crying, it's hungry, it wants something to eat. How do you hide a baby for 3 months? But the Bible says that, that Jochebed and her husband, Amram, they hid this child for 3 months. And, and they did everything they could, and then finally they put him in the bulrushes, and they're trying to hide him. They're doing everything they can, and yet, there's only so much they can do. And then we see the choice of the princess. Pharaoh's daughter, she's coming down to the Nile to bathe, and they're walking along, and they see and they hear this baby crying in the bulrushes, and she sends one of her servants, and they goes and gets them, and they bring this crying baby, and she understands that she sees this little child. She knows it's a Hebrew child, probably because it had been circumcised, and she sees that, and the baby's crying, and the Bible says that she had compassion on him. Really, here she is. Let's understand, we know that Moses' mother, Jochebed, she made a choice to let her baby live. And she was doing everything she could to protect him. And, and that's the way mothers are. Good mothers are. They protect their child, and they want them to live. But here, when we see this in chapter 2, that here it says the princess had compassion on him. And compassion, it means to spare. And it also means to have pity on. And the princess had a choice. You see, she wasn't dumb. She knew what her father had said. She knew that he said that all male children under 2 were to die, and she knew that. And you think, well, I don't know if she was afraid of her father or not, but I think he's the leader of the land. He's the one who has the power, and he could have done anything he wanted. But she chose. She could have tipped that little floating ark over, and really that's what it was, and drowned, and Moses would have drowned. But she doesn't do that. She has compassion on him, and she doesn't obey the decree of her father and kill this child. And it would have been all too easy to do, but she chose life. But let's face the facts. She lived in a death culture. They had decreed that all these babies were going to die. And today we live in a death culture. We live in a culture where abortion is so common, and so many women choose to not give their child life. It's kind of a scary thing, but, here's several illustrations of where we've come to. Consider the following thing. In 2008, 1.2 million abortions were performed in the United States. That's women that chose death over life for their baby. We see in 2009 the average cost of a non-hospital abortion, anesthesia and everything, 10 weeks gestation, $451. 50% of American women, U.S. women, obtained abortions are younger than 25. Women aged 20 to 24 obtain 33% of abortions. And I think I saw a statistic for today of 60 million have been aborted. And you think they chose death. They chose death over life for their child. And, and you think about Jochebed and this princess, what did they do? They chose life for Moses and risked their lives. They didn't regard their own life. They chose rather to let this child live. And it's kind of, they chose life, and we see how things are for us today, but, choosing life is important, and we need to understand that. And I was thinking about the fact that, I thank God for every mother that chooses life. Some have chosen not to. And, the beautiful thing is, and I think something that's really important for us to think about is that, the fact that they didn't choose life for their child is not that they can't choose to be forgiven. That God is still forgiving, and He'll forgive people who have done that. And you don't never know who's had to who followed that path for whatever reason they chose. But they can be forgiven. I was talking to someone not too long ago who had chosen to have an abortion. And she said, it's haunted me all my life. Ever since that day that I did that. And it really bothered her more than anyone could ever know. But, if you followed that path, God still loves you. He cares about you. And a person can be forgiven. And that's the beautiful thing about it. And, death, for them, death for Moses might have been easier if they knew what all he's going to have to endure and have to face. But what do? They chose life. And you think about it, I think about these beautiful babies running around here. If people could just see the babies now and see them as they are now and know exactly what they have. But see, some people choose death. You see Pharaoh's daughter, she follows the path. She comes down to the river. She sees the baby. And what does she do? She chooses life. And that's so important for us to think about. Choose life. They chose life for Moses. I think you start looking at the second thing they chose to give Moses was love. Moses' mother, when you start looking at her, both women, basically God placed in their life Moses, and they loved him more than they loved themselves. And that's important as a mother, and and having to have a child and bring a child into this world, and you just got to love them more than you love yourself, and you got to care about them more than anything else. But his adopted mother, basically she risked the wrath of her father. Why did she do that? Because she saw this child, and he was a godly child. But when you look at it here, Jochebed, she loved Moses because he was her son. And you think, when a baby comes in, I remember when my little Nathan was born, and he was such a tiny baby and such a beautiful child, and it talks about Moses, how he was a lovely child. And I thought, are all babies lovely? They are to mama, ain't they? You look at, you see this baby born, and you say, well, boy, doesn't that such a beautiful baby? You say, well, yeah, I guess so. It might be. But here, when you think about here, Moses, they chose to love him. And, Moses' mother, he was born to her. And Jochebed loved Moses basically because he was her son. And she knew that, and she cared about him, and she risked her life for him. And in verses 7 to 9, you think about how that she loved him, and we see that it says that then his sister said to Pharaoh's daughter, "Shall I go and call a nurse for you, for the Hebrew women, and she may nurse your child?" So, here we see that she had sent this protective person to watch out for her baby. But, here they had this love, and it makes sense. She loved Moses more than she loved herself. And I think parents, they make that commitment to bring a child into this world, and they face so many things, so much opposition that we have to be careful. We've got to love them enough to see and try to do what's best for them. And sometimes the children don't understand it, but she loved Moses. But now, when you look at it, the princess loved Moses too. And she loved Moses because he put it in her heart. And I was thinking about how as she looked at this child, and her heart went out to him. She had compassion on him. And of course, Moses, it means he was drawn out of the river. She drew him out of the river. And she took this child, and it's hard to escape the irony of the situation. Pharaoh had to pay for Moses to be raised, the child that was going to disrupt his life and disrupt his nation, is who Moses was. And of course, it helps us to be reminded that God's in control. God had this situation under control, and He wants us to understand that. But God put love in this woman's heart, to love him, and for Pharaoh's daughter to love him and to care for him. And so, God spared Moses. We see in Acts chapter 7, verse 29 and 30, or 29 and 30, it says, "The same dealt subtly with our kindred, and evil entreated our fathers, so that they cast out their young children to the end that they might not live, in which Moses was born, and was exceedingly fair, and it says, nourished up in his father's house 3 months." And this phrase, exceedingly fair, it literally means he was fair to God. God loved him, and God had a plan for this child. And you never know. You ever wonder when your child born, what is he going to become? What is she going to become? And the impact that you have on it. the impact that you share. And, parents, we understand. There was a young mother one time, and basically this young mother was making her way across the hills of South Wales, carrying her tiny baby in her arms, and when she was overtaken by a blizzard, she never reached her destination. And when the blizzard had subsided, searchers found her beneath a mound of snow, found her body. But they discovered that before her death. Before her death, she had taken off all her outer clothes and wrapped her baby in it. And when they unwrapped the child, to their great surprise and joy, they found he was alive. She had mounted her body over his and given him life for her child, proving the depths of the mother's love. Yet years later, this child, David Lloyd George, grown to manhood, became Prime Minister of Great Britain, and without a doubt, one of England's greatest statesmen. Yes, this mother, basically we see the mother's love, the mother's protection. Jochebed and Pharaoh's daughter, what did they do? They showed a great love. And we want to understand, there's an illustration also of a teacher who asked a boy a question. Suppose your mother baked a pie, and there was 7 of you, your parents and 5 children. What part of the pie would you get? The boy said promptly, a 6th. Replied the boy, I'm afraid you don't understand fractions, said the teacher. Remember, there are 7 of you. And yes, teacher, the boy said, but you don't know my mother. He said, my mother would say she didn't want any pie. And so, basically a mother's love, a mother's care. I ran across this, and it's a great thunder about mothers. It says, why do you love newborn children? I know, it's a silly question, but indulge me. Why do you? For months, this baby has brought you pain. They've made you break out in pimples and waddle like a duck. Because of them, you crave sardines and crackers and threw up in the morning. They punched you in the tummy. They occupied a space that wasn't theirs and ate food they didn't fix. You kept them warm. You kept them safe. You kept them fed. But did they say thank you? Are you kidding? She's no more out of the womb, and she starts crying. The room is cold. The blanket is too rough. The nurse is too mean. And who does she want? She wants Mama. Do you ever get a break? Who has been doing the work for the last 9 months? Why don't Dad take over? Well, that can't happen. And the baby wants Mama. She didn't even tell you she was coming. She just came. And what a coming. She rendered you a barbarian. You screamed and swore, and you bit bullets and tore the sheets. I remember when that happened. Joyce, I'd never heard a bad word out of her mouth till she had her first baby. Yep, it wasn't a real bad word, but it was something she wouldn't ever say. But she rendered you a barbarian. You screamed, you swore, you bit bullets, and you tore the sheets. And now look at you. Your back aches, your head pounds, your body's drenched in sweat, every muscle strained and stretched. You should be angry, but are you? Far from it. On your face is a longer than forever smile of love. They've done nothing for you, yet you love them. They've brought pain to your body and nausea to your mourning, and you treasure them. Their face is wrinkled and their eyes are dim. Yet all you can talk about are your good looks, their good looks and their bright future. She's going to wake up every night for the next 6 weeks, but that doesn't matter. I can see it on your face. You're crazy about her. Why does a mother love her newborn? Because the baby is hers. Even more, because the baby is hers. Her blood, her flesh, her sinew, her spine, her hope, her legacy. It bothers her not that your baby gives nothing. She knows a newborn is helpless and weak. She knows babies don't ask to come into the world, and God knows we didn't either. We are His idea. We are His face. We are His eyes. We are His hands, His touch. We are Him. Thank God for the way parents love their children. You see, that makes so much the difference. But now the question that we want to ask finally is, do we choose to teach them leadership? And you see, to me, this is one of the most amazing things about Moses, because both mothers gave Moses leadership. They invested in his life. This Egyptian mother, what does she do? It says here in Acts 7, it says, when he was cast out, Pharaoh's daughter took him up and nourished him and for her own son. And Moses learned all the wisdom of the Egyptians and was mighty in words and deeds. Moses was a leader. And he was a leader because he was trained in all the wisdom of the Egyptians. And I wonder, what are we training our kids to do? I know they go to school. I'll tell you, you think about what's the most important education that you can give your child. Well, they need education, don't get me wrong, but their spiritual education is the most important. And it's amazing to me, when you look at Hebrews chapter 11, here we find Moses. It says, by faith Moses, when he come to years, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to suffer affliction with the people of God than to enjoy the pleasures of sin for a season. Now, she took all those things that Pharaoh's daughter taught her in all those schools and all that education he got, and he learned. He learned the ways of the Egyptians, and he knew them, and and he was a leader. But Jochebed was still his mother, and she still instilled something in him that Pharaoh's daughter couldn't do. You see, it says when he was come to years, he refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to suffer affliction with the people of God than to enjoy the pleasures of sin for a season, esteeming the reproach of Christ greater riches than the treasures of Egypt, for he had respect unto the recompense of the reward. By faith he forsook Egypt, not fearing the wrath of the king, for he endured, and seeing him who is invisible. Isn't that amazing? You reckon Jochebed did much and Amram did much to train Moses? They were working with him and training him in spite of that. She was his nurse, and she was helping take care of him. And all the time, she wasn't just feeding him and clothing him or helping him in that area. She was teaching him about who he really was. And you see, that's what we got to do. Our kids live in a similar world of what Moses lived in. It is a death world. And we have a responsibility, an awesome responsibility, to teach them and to help them and to make sure that they understand who they really are. You see, they can take the things they learn in education and school, and that's okay, and they need that, and it'll help them even in their spiritual realm. But here, Moses, he made a choice. And you and I need to teach our kid that the most important choice that they will ever make is to follow Jesus Christ. You see, Moses, he made that decision. And it's interesting, in the book of Acts chapter 7, when it's talking about Moses understood his role. He understood what he was supposed to do. It says, in seeing one of them suffer wrong, he defended him and avenged him that was oppressed and smote the Egyptians. Now this is Acts 7, 24 to 29. For he supposed his brethren would have understood how God by his hand would deliver them, but they did not understand. Moses understood, but they didn't understand. Now, you think about it this morning. What is the most important thing you can teach your children or your grandchildren? It's about God. You see, a scary thing to me, I think of a lot of moral parents and who never bring their kids to Bible school or church. And yet, you'll ask them, do you believe in Jesus? Oh, yeah. But do you know Jesus? You see, there's a difference in believing in Jesus and knowing Jesus. You got to know him to train him, to teach him. And so we see these two women. They took on this role. They took on this responsibility. But you think, what is the most important thing? You see, the lesson Moses learned from his mother set his course of life. Yes, all the other things were important, but your lessons that you teach your child when they're little, and I always heard that in Catholicism that they said, if you'll give me your child till he's 6 years old, he'll always be a Catholic. And that's pretty much true. But what is the most important thing? Well, the most important thing is to teach them to fear God and keep his commandments. See, that's what Moses learned, and Moses had to learn that before he could really be the leader that he needed to be. And so that's what he did. And as you and I think about Moses, we think about our children as we bring them into this world, our grandchildren. What do we want to do? We need to understand that God providentially prepared Moses for his role of delivering Israel through two women he gave to be his mothers. You see, what an impact we have as parents on the course of our children. You know, we need to be on the right path. We need to be doing what God wants us to do. You see, God can providentially work. He can help us, but, you know, we've got to have our faith and our trust in Him. You see, in spite of death threat, you know, what did Jochebed and Amram do? They chose to ignore the king's order, and they did what God wanted them to do. This morning we ask, are we doing what God wants us to do? Are we being that impact on our young people that we need to be, our children, our grandchildren? Are we setting that example? You know, we need to make it our aim, make it our goal to do everything we can to help our children get to heaven, because that is the eternal destiny. And you and I, one day we're going to get to go. You know, we won't take them with us, but, you know, we have an impact. We have opportunity to be able to help them to get to heaven. Their influence these women had on Moses made him into the man that he became. The hand that rocks a cradle, what does it do? Rules the world. Mama has a great role, doesn't she? We got great mamas. And we know our role. Parents, fathers, mothers, we have a responsibility. And I hope you're meeting that, setting that example. If you're not a Christian this morning, what a great opportunity to step forward and put Christ on in baptism, to rise to walk in newness of life, to have that opportunity to make that journey to heaven. And not only that, to take somebody with you, whether it be your own children or other people's children, or to have that impact on the world. If you're here this morning, not a Christian, what a great opportunity. Maybe you need the prayers of the church for strength and guidance. And we're here to help you and pray with you and for you if you need it, and ask God to forgive you and if there's things that are amiss, and ask God for strength. If you're here this morning, the invitation is yours. It's for you, and we're family, and we want you to come as together we stand and sing. Would you be free from the burden?